Welcome to the University of Kentucky Robinson Forest. We will be utilizing this 10,000 acre research, demonstration, and education forest to help host this NASP module. Robinson Forest was transferred to the University of Kentucky in the 1920s after the Mulberry and Robinson Company basically commercially logged it. And it has been subjected to the management under University of Kentucky since that time. It's a really good representation of forest typical of the northern Cumberland Plateau physiographic region. We have many oak-dominated stands, but we have a large gradient of site conditions, topographical and edaphic site conditions that help us really have a real rich suite of forest, from dry xeric ridgetops with some mixed pine communities. We have a lot of core of our forest is these slopes dominated by upland oaks, and we have important components of the forest with Mesic Cove sites, including hemlock, where we haven't yet had any mortality yet from hemlock in the hemlock woolly adelgid. We're going to allow some of our long-term research studies to come into this the programming, looking at what these silvicultural studies have done to stand development, and tying in some data that we have from these long-term studies, some footage. We'll look at a variety of sites that represent the gradient of oak stands out here, to think about them from an ecological basis, but also the silvicultural decision-making processes and treatments. We'll use other long-term studies related to crop tree release. We'll cover aspects of stand development. Essentially, we're going to use this 10,000 acre forest as a backdrop in allowing a detailed look at not only how the forests of the region function, how that's driven by site and local conditions, but also how we make silvicultural decisions from objectives of, from a timber production standpoint, but also for ecosystem service standpoint, allowing us to provide this group of NASP students with a really quality experience in terms of visiting sites through virtual means, providing key lectures and data, and providing as good an experience as we can through the virtual means and delivery. We have a situation here where we have two ephemeral drains, one back there and one coming down here. It creates this upper basin, and we're transitioning from these upper slope positions where we have chestnut oak and other red oaks, as well as white oak on the upper slopes. As we move down, even though this is still fairly up in the whole watershed, it has this basin-like or concave landform. So we have, moisture accumulation here, probably some downslope collection of soil as well. So we have a mixture here of our upland species. For example, we have a nice example of white oak here. There's a chestnut oak upslope, and there's several northern red oak in here. As well as our suite of more Mesic species. We have directly behind us a few yellow poplar. There's an ash over here, a few, maybe 15 yards away. If you look up into the canopy, you can see it's also succumbed to the emerald ash borer. Probably not well visible in the footage right now, but there's also a black walnut in this immediate area. In essence, this is a kind of a transitioning between Cove Mesic hardwoods as well as upland oak. And so we have a high site productivity here, and it, while has a good component of oak in the community here, it'd be much more challenging to regenerate white oak and other oaks on this side as it would be to the more xeric and intermediate sites that we'll also visit. So what is going on here, it's an oak-dominated site compared to some of the more Mesic sites that we might look at in this class or touring. You would look around and you see a lot of white oak. You expect, well, regeneration potential is going to be very high here. Well, as it turns out, because of the environmental conditions created by the lower crown classes creating a lot of shade, we don't have a lot of seedlings present. So we still have a lot of silviculture intervention ahead of us if we were looking to reestablish a new age class of white oak here on this site. As we move up into the more xeric sites, we'll see a lot higher potential for regeneration in terms of inherent to the site. So the Shelterwood system is one of the 3 even-aged regeneration methods, and it is designed to create gradium conditions to regenerate tree species that need either reduced light or light to be added over a series of entries in the process of developing sizable advanced reproduction in order to regenerate and recruit eventually. Oak is one of those species in the region that require advanced reproduction ahead of a overstory removal, whether that's a natural disturbance or whether it's a silvicultural intervention. Because in many of our undisturbed stands we have this invasion of maple and beech and other shade tolerance, we have very low light levels in the understory typically. In this location we're at right now, a mid-story removal, which was the initial phase of the Shelterwood, was put in approximately 5 years ago to help increase understory light availability and to help culture the oak reproduction that had established after a bumper acorn crop here. We can see here below us in the foreground a couple of northern red oak seedlings that have responded to the increased light. And what a mid-story removal treatment does is it reduces the level of shade that is low to the ground and the density of these overtopped and intermediate crown class trees. In this particular location, our prescription was to remove all of the intermediate and overtopped trees, either through chemical deadening or felling and treating of the stumps with herbicide. And so what you do is you raise the canopy from getting rid of that low shade. You have a long length of location from where these trees are getting their light to where light can penetrate. So if you look up into the canopy, it basically only leaves the foliage that's high up above from the co-dominant dominant trees, and allows these small openings between each of these overstory trees, the light that passes through those to actually hit the forest floor instead of being intercepted by that low shade represented by the mid-story. So relating to the Shelterwood, if we were looking at the next step typically would be an establishment cut where you remove trees from the main overstory, or if by chance the mid-story removal treatment was successful enough to create large, sizable 3 to 5+ feet tall seedlings, then maybe an overstory removal could happen at that time. In this particular case, we haven't seen large development of large advanced reproduction, so likely the next phase in here would be this establishment cut phase. We're here on a ridgetop location where we have an example of a mid-story removal treatment, which represents the initial step or an initial step in an even-age Shelterwood system. And we have a couple examples of how these trees were removed, but in essence mid-story removal is designed to reduce the lower crown classes and remove that low shade to allow forest reproduction, primarily our desired oaks, to get to larger sizes in order to be competitive on subsequent overstory removals. So this again is what we refer to as mid-story removal. It falls typical. This is what we refer to as mid-story removal. It falls under the preparatory phase of the Shelterwood cut. And we can see here in the foreground we have a tree that was removed by felling and chemical spray. We have an example of a standing dead sugar maple here that you can still see the hack marks where they conducted hack and squirt, and you can view up and you can see that it's standing dead. Although there are trees out here, and this is an operational consideration when using these treatments at certain times of the year on species like red maple. You can see that there's several hacks where they would have injected this tree. The tree has sprouted from the base, but panning up you can see this tree is still alive and healthy. So there are examples of making sure you use appropriate chemical or herbicide application techniques and concentrations to get trees to deaden when that's prescription is called for. We're here standing in one of the Midstory removal treatment areas, and it is originally designed to remove the overtopped and intermediate crown class trees to create higher light levels. Well depicted at the time of day we're out here right now, getting a good level of diffuse and direct beam sunlight to the forest floor. Some things that do happen, of course, after you perform a treatment, the subsequent phases of the Shelterwood are looking to increase light levels to higher points by removing part of the overstory tree canopies. But there are cases where these silvicultural activities occur, and then some natural disturbance will occur to actually maybe move that stand along to a point where you're hoping to get anyway. We have seen that with ice storms in the region, where you'll have an ice storm come in after an activity, breaks apart the canopy, and you see a response in the forest understory as that ice storm as certainly a historical disturbance that would have helped our forest regenerate. But as we move this way, we're going to see on this north side of this ridgetop, we had a collection of ash trees. Of course, the emerald ash borer is an invasive insect that is killing ash through much of its range. Started in Michigan, moving all the way in now south of the Ohio Valley. But as we'll walk into there, you can see that these ash have died over time in the last few years. Some still have leaves on them, some do not. But it's created sort of a natural establishment cut, meaning that this Midstory removal removed all the low shade, and now as these ash trees are dying off, you're seeing an increase in light availability from light penetrating through the overstory. So as I disappear in here in the reproduction coming up here in this opening, if we pan up and look here, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 ash trees that have died in the past few years. A couple still have a few leaves, but it's created a dramatic opening in the canopy, very similar to what we would see in a Shelterwood establishment cut, where we have removed that low shade with the Midstory removal, and now this invasive insect has removed part of our overstory. But you can see the dramatic difference in the amount of response in this forest understory, where we have, this is sugar maple in this case, we have species that are more shade intolerant, we have yellow poplar popping up, red bud is another kind of light loving species that comes in disturbed areas. But you can see just from the height of this, a pretty good response of the vegetation here following this Midstory removal and this subsequent influence of the canopy by the emerald ash borer. So clearly an example of how when you have these invasive insects come in, you need to be responsive and be able to consider what is going to happen from a stand development or regeneration perspective when that comes in. Scattered trees here and there of ash that die are not going to cause a big issue, but we can see here from this example, at least on this site, we can see that they start to create gaps that are not going to be filled by adjacent canopies. All right, here we are on a west-facing slope, upper slope position on the UK Robinson Forest. We're visiting this site as part of an evaluation of gradient of oak sites from more cove sites to very xeric ridgetop communities. And one of those things that I'll note before we get into talking about this site in particular is that as you move from Mesic to xeric oak sites, the likelihood of that large advanced oak reproduction, that reproduction that's necessary to regenerate oak stands, the more xeric the site is, the more likely that's going to develop inherently, because of xeric sites have more open canopies. They generally have less mid-story vegetation, and the crowns are less full. Lower productivity site, less leaf area, etc. And so Paul Johnson's book, The Ecology and Silviculture of Oak, highlights these sites that naturally have a large advanced oak reproduction as accumulator sites, meaning that these pools of advanced reproduction accumulate over time. Whereas in these more Mesic sites that we visited, that doesn't typically happen very easily. So given that talk about this gradient of conditions, we're going to speak to this site particularly. This is again a west-facing slope on the UK Robinson Forest, upper slope position. Very poor quality site in terms of site index, probably well below 60 here, oak site index. The two dominant overstory components here, we have scarlet oak and we have pitch pine. So these two are co-occurring. Pine used to be a lot more prominent on the landscape here historically, where burning was more frequent. And then when the southern pine beetle came through this region in the early 2000s, a lot of these remnant pine stands were hit hard, and a lot of them are no longer here. A lot of the pine have died off. So this is one of those remnant pine hardwood stands that are still in relative condition. And we are going to take a walk in a moment, but I would like you to kind of look up where we're standing now. We can see 4 or 5 pitch pines. We can see how their crowns are kind of being encroached upon by the hardwood regeneration, or hardwood overstory. And pines are very intolerant of shade, and these hardwoods can have broader spreading crowns that can outcompete them. So over time, you would expect this site to transition away from pine without sort of some intervening disturbance. So we're going to take a walk, and then we'll talk a little bit about silvicultural implications on this site. So we can see even on this site, we have the development of maple midstory instead of the sugar maple beech contingency that occurs on many of these more productive sites. This is typically a red maple dominance in the midstory. So it's not quite as thick as it would be on a more productive site, but it's still pronounced, and it is here. So in the foreground here, we have an excellent example, and I'll move away so maybe you can get a little better vantage point of it. So we have a really excellent example of one of these co-dominant pines on this site. These would certainly serve as important seed sources if we were looking towards enhancing the pine community on this site. One challenge, of course, in managing pine is that they require more frequent disturbance. And if we're looking from a silvicultural objective and we were trying to work towards regenerating this stand, we would probably work towards decreasing the community of hardwoods here. And so while this might be an oak-related prescription, it certainly might be more restorative in the purposes of providing the right conditions for pine regeneration. So if you look up above here at this crown of this pine, it's still in a good position, probably has a decent level of seed production. You can see a number of cones on it, so it could serve as a potential seed source for any regeneration treatments here. So again, another pocket of pitch pine on these sites here, and we're going to discuss a little bit about potential pathways for silvicultural intervention. When we discuss oak regeneration, we know that we need large advanced reproduction to successfully regenerate oak sites. Of course, the nature of our southern yellow pines particularly short. And pitch pine is that they're more disturbance dominated regeneration type species, where you need a canopy disturbance and probably a surface disturbance to get germination to occur across a wide part of the stand. We do have some small oak advanced reproduction here, but because of the litter layers and the nature of the forest floor, we really don't have any pine starting to come in underneath this. So if we're looking to kind of create a mixed oak pine community here, we probably would look towards a Shelterwood system, potentially layered in with the prescribed fire regime that would help do a couple of things. One, it would reduce the mid canopy through chemical or mechanical means of removing this hardwood and the shade tolerance that are sort of encroaching in upon this pine scarlet oak community. The other would be to certainly favor the canopy positions of the pine to help maintain them on the sites. So that would be reduction in overstory densities, probably through limiting the non-pine component and selecting only those oak species that probably would stay here a little bit longer on the site. Unfortunately, the dominant oak on this site is scarlet oak, not a particularly long-lived oak. Usually after year 100, 120, we start to see it decline quite significantly. Say 50% canopy cover communities that might help establish some advanced oak reproduction. But I see this, this is not a site where you typically manage for the production of high quality saw timber. It's a pretty low quality site, and scarlet oak on these sites aren't particularly desirable. So, but from an ecological perspective, this represents a site that has the good potential to help in this interest, both for shortleaf pine as part of the shortleaf initiative, but also pitch pine, which can co-occur on these kind of sites here. So this presents an interesting silvicultural example of where we can use our toolbox of stand manipulations and the same tools that we would use when we're growing stands with the objective of producing wood products. Here we can use those toolbox, the Shelterwood system, prescribed fire, to help enhance the pine community on this landscape. So here we are on a dry rocky ridgetop in the UK Robinson Forest. Has a southwestern aspect, represents the sort of the dry, very dry end of the perspective on the oak dominated sites here. This site, as you can see from the ground surface, has a lot of exposed rock, thin soils. The vegetation here would indicate the dryness, probably acidity as well. We have overstory components. We have primarily chestnut oak. We have a few scattered scarlet oak and a few Virginia pine up here. The understory, we have mountain laurel as well as some vaccinium. So we have kind of the usual suspects of dry xeric sites. We do have a bit of red maple in sort of recruiting in the understory, but the density of those are well lower than what we would see on more productive or intermediate quality sites. These oak sites represent the spectrum of accumulator xeric oak sites that are more successionally stable. So if we're up here on this site, and we also looked at west-facing, or we will or have looked at a west-facing pine hardwood site. We looked at we'll look at a lower slope white oak site, and then a more Mesic Cove site, representing a whole gradient of potential oak conditions that you might see in this region. In terms of silviculturally, these sites maybe wouldn't be managed very intensively or managed at all. These very little timber value up here, but there is some interest in still regenerating xeric sites or restoring more open woodland communities on these sites, and it would be very similar tools that we would use for canopy reduction to help create more open conditions, to help either oak recruit, potentially help some forbs and grass species that maybe have been associated with more open woodland communities on these xeric sites, and certainly take care of some of the maple invasion that might occur, as well as on these sites where dominant pine or desirable pine may occur, would also be helped by such things. So most of the silvicultural tools that you would use up here would relate towards maintenance of these community types through either interventions like the Shelterwood system or potentially prescribed fire.